Hey everyone, welcome back to Real Talk, the show where I break down films both iconic and infamous, diving into what makes them tick, for better or worse. I'm your host Josh, and today I want to take a trip back to the mid-80s, a time of big hair, synth music, and apparently bizarre cinematic choices. That's right, we're talking about Howard the Duck, the 1986 live-action adaptation of Marvel's most sarcastic, cigar-chomping, intergalactic waterfowl. Now, if you've ever seen Howard the Duck, let me set the stage for you. Imagine it's 1986. Marvel, not yet the cinematic powerhouse we know today. There are no Avengers, Iron Man, or Spider-Man swinging across billion-dollar box office numbers. Instead, the very first theatrically released Marvel movie is a film about a talking duck, wearing a tiny leather jacket, getting into bar fights, and somehow romancing Leah Thompson. Yes, that happened. Howard the Duck, it has one of the weirdest reputations in Hollywood history. It was a massive flop when it came out. Critics shredded it. Audiences avoided it. And even George Lucas, who produced it, supposedly sold off parts of Lucasfilm afterwards to recoup some of the losses. But in the decades since, the film has gained an unlikely cult following. Some people love its off-the-wall absurdity. Others embrace it as one of those so bad it's good experiences. And then there are people, like me, who wonder what exactly was everyone thinking when they made this film. So the big question for today is Howard Duck an underrated gem that deserves a second look? Or is it just as much of a misguided mess as history claims? Well, buckle up, because we're going to dive deep into this oddball 80s experiment, break down what works, what absolutely does not, and why, despite everything, it's still a movie people discuss and talk about nearly 40 years later. Let's get right into it. Hey, need a boost without the crash? Head over to dubby.gg, that's dubby.gg, for all your energy drink needs. No sugar, no fillers, just clean focus and serious flavor. And here's the kicker. Use the code REALREAL, REALREEL, at checkout and score 10% off your order. That's REALREAL, one word, for 10% off at dubby.gg. Fuel up, stay sharp, keep it real. Looking for chills that crawl up your spine and reviews that cut deeper than a butcher's blade? Welcome to Real Talk Horror Edition, where classic slashers, indie creepers, and cult nightmares are dissected with a bloody passion. Whether you're into slow burns or splatterfests, we've got the guts, the gore, and the geek out. So dim the lights, press play, and let your darkest curiosities run wild. Real Talk Horror Edition, where horror lives and breathes. Real horror, real talk. Available anywhere you get your podcasts. You ever hear about a movie so infamous that it almost becomes required viewing just to see if it's really that bad? Well, Plan 9 from Outer Space comes to mind, but it's also Howard the Duck in a nutshell. Whether you've seen it or just heard the horror stories, this 1986 oddity has a reputation that precedes it. It's the kind of film that leaves people asking, how in the world did this happen? And not in an excited, like Jurassic Park kind of way, but more in the what in the world were they thinking kind of way. But here's the thing, it wasn't supposed to be a disaster. In fact, Howard the Duck had some really big names behind it. People who had already changed Hollywood forever. So what went wrong? And that's what I want to look at. Let's start with how this bizarre experiment came to be. Alright, so we rewind back to the mid-80s. Hollywood is in full blockbuster mode. Mid-70s started it all with Jaws, and Star Wars and Indiana Jones had really just redefined what sci-fi was and what an adventure film could be, and studios were willing to take some big risks on weird ideas. Enter George Lucas, the man who was at least partially responsible for those two aforementioned juggernauts. At this point, he was pretty much untouchable. His company, Lucasfilm, had been a massive success, and Industrial Light and Magic, his visual effects studio, was revolutionizing special effects everywhere. So when Lucas decided he wanted to bring Howard the Duck, this relatively obscure Marvel Comics character, to the big screen, who was going to tell this guy no? Well, the original plan was actually for an animated movie, which makes way more sense considering the character. But at some point, the idea got scrapped in favor of, well, live action. Why? Well, because Universal had already agreed to distribute the film, and Lucas wanted to push it forward quickly. So to direct, Lucas brought in Willard Huyck, who, along with his wife, Gloria Katz, had co-written American Graffiti and Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. So their resume sounds pretty solid, right? Well, there's a catch. Huyck wasn't exactly known for directing. He only had a few movies on his resume before Howard the Duck, Messiah of Evil in 74, French Postcards in 79, and the awful Dudley Moore, Eddie Murphy movie Best Defense in 1984. He wasn't exactly catching the big screen on fire. But he thought that this was going to be the project that would change that. Well, now we know it's not. It's actually the last movie he ever directed. As for the cast, the lead human role went to Leah Thompson, who was fresh off of Back to the Future. She plays Beverly, a struggling rock musician who, for reasons that never really make any sense, becomes Howard's closest ally and possibly love interest, but let's not get into that just yet. Then there's the always problematic Jeffrey Jones, best known as the principal in Ferris Bueller. He plays Dr. Jennings, a scientist who gets caught up in some really questionable experiments. Then there's Tim Robbins as Phil, this goofy lab assistant who might just be the most over-the-top character in a movie where the main character is a talking duck. I mean, he just is in full-on goof mode. He is more cartoon character than the duck. He's ridiculous. But then, of course, we also have Howard himself. Howard was brought to life by a combination of practical effects and puppetry, with Ed Gale in the actual duck suit and Chip Zien providing the voice. And the result was, well, it's just Howard's animatronic face has aged about as well as unrefrigerated milk. It looks really bad. And this movie had some expectations. Lucas was hoping it would be like another Star Wars level hit, and the studio was banking on his track record. Even the marketing leaned into the idea that this was going to be something groundbreaking. Instead, it flopped. It flopped hard. Critics tore it apart. Audiences were confused, and it didn't even come close to making its budget back. And it became one of the biggest box office bombs of the decade. And here's the kicker. This was the first Marvel movie ever made. Before Blade, before X-Men, and before the MCU. Imagine if Iron Man had bombed this badly, Marvel would not be the powerhouse it is today. But why is it on my watch list? Why revisit Howard the Duck now? Well, simple. It's a fascinating train wreck. Over the years, the film has developed a cult following, not because it's secretly brilliant, but because it's just so weird that people can't help be drawn to it. This is one of those movies where you keep watching, not because it's good, but because you're constantly asking yourself, did they really do this? It's like the idea of you can't look away from a train wreck, and that's what this is. Plus, I wanted to see if it's really as bad as the reputation suggests, because when I watched this, it would have been in late 86 or early 87 when I was just a kid. I was 7 or 8 years old, and I remember enjoying it, but I haven't watched it since then, so let's find out. And I was hoping maybe, just maybe, that there's something here that's been unfairly overlooked. Or maybe what I find out is it's just the disaster history claims it to be. But let's talk more about that. All right, now for the breakdown. But before we dive in, let me set the stage here. I know we've said it, but let's remind. Howard the Duck is one of those movies that you have to really experience to believe. Of course, it's got talking ducks, it's got weird 80s sci-fi effects, and this oddly unsettling romance subplot. And a villain that looks like something out of someone's fever dream. And if someone told you Marvel's first major theatrical release would be this, you'd probably assume someone's messing with you. But no, this is real, and we're going to break it down. So, what exactly happens in Howard the Duck? Well, Howard is just your average, everyday duck, except he smokes cigars, he reads duck-themed adult magazines, and lives in a world that is basically our own, but, well, duckified, I guess. Instead of Playboy, it's Playduck. Instead of Raiders of the Lost Ark, it's Breeders of the Lost Stork. I mean, you get the idea. One night, Howard is suddenly yanked from his recliner by an unknown force and violently hurled through space, crashing into a back alley in Cleveland, Ohio. He has no idea how he got here, why he was pulled from his planet, or how he's going to ever get home. And if you're thinking, well, surely he meets some scientist who helps him figure it out, you'd only be partly right. First, he gets mugged, thrown out of a bar, and treated like a weird carnival attraction. But eventually, he meets Beverly, the struggling musician played by Leah Thompson. Beverly is way more chill about the whole talking duck from another planet thing than you'd expect. Instead of screaming and running away, like probably a normal person, she takes Howard under her wing. From there, they meet Phil, played by a young Tim Robbins, who believes Howard could be the biggest scientific discovery of all time. But just when Howard starts to get semi-adjusted to life on Earth, things take this sharp left turn when Dr. Jennings, another scientist involved in the experiment that actually brought Howard to Earth, becomes possessed by this interdimensional entity known as the Dark Overlord. Anyways, it's up to Howard, Beverly, and Phil to try to stop the Overlord before he brings more of his kind to Earth. It really is a wild ride. It's filled with bizarre choices, extremely weird dialogue, and a surprising amount of laser-based action. But let's talk about some of the more standout moments. The moments in Howard the Duck that kind of stick with you, whether you want them to or not. First, Howard's arrival on Earth, because the movie wastes no time letting you know what kind of experience you're in for. We start on Duck World, and the attention to detail is honestly pretty impressive. There are duck-specific versions of everything. Movies, ads, even furniture. Howard himself is just chilling in his apartment when, out of nowhere, he's pulled from his home by an unseen force. The next thing we know, he's hurtling through space, crashing through buildings, and eventually slamming into an alleyway in Cleveland. And the thing is, Howard doesn't take this well. He's confused, he's angry, and he's immediately thrown into a series of chaotic encounters with humans who don't know what to make of him. It's an absolutely ridiculous sequence, but it sets the tone for the film perfectly. You either buckle in for the madness or you've already checked out. And then another scene, Howard versus the cops. This is one of the more over-the-top moments. It's Howard's run-in with the police. At this moment, or this point, he's been through quite a bit. He's been harassed, he's been mocked, and just when things seem like they might settle down, he finds himself being chased by cops who apparently have nothing better to do than try to arrest this talking duck. What follows is a scene filled with slapstick action, some unnecessary destruction, and Howard's attempt at being a fugitive. The practical effects are a mixed bag. Sometimes Howard moves pretty convincingly. Other times, it's painfully obvious that he's just a dude in a suit trying to waddle away. This is one of those sequences where you don't know if you should be laughing with the movie or just laughing at the movie. And then the final battle with the Dark Overlord. This is where Howard the Duck decides to become this full-blown sci-fi horror action film. Up until now, the movie has been this weird blend of comedy, adventure, and whatever that almost romance between Howard and Beverly was. But in the final act, it leans straight into special effects heavy action. Dr. Jennings, who has slowly been transforming into something not so human, finally reveals his true form as the Dark Overlord. And credit where it's due, the creature design is actually pretty solid. It's got that classic 80s animatronic vibe, kind of in the same realm as The Thing or Ghostbusters, just not as well done, but that idea. Howard, despite being a small, flightless duck, takes charge. He wields a makeshift sci-fi weapon and tries to stop the Overlord before he can bring more of his kind to the Earth. The battle is just absurd, and it really overstays its welcome, but it does at least bring some kind of excitement to the final stretch of the film. And that's really what it is. It's this bizarre, baffling Howard the Duck, a film that leaves you asking a lot more questions than it answers, like who thought a wisecracking duck in a live-action setting was a good idea, and why does this movie feel like 5 different genres mashed into one? And most importantly, why in the world does Beverly seem way too okay with the idea of dating a duck? Well, stick around because next I'll talk to you about what I really think about Howard the Duck and whether it's worth watching, or if you should just let this one remain a strange footnote in Marvel's history. Alright, well, let's get real. I knew Howard the Duck had a reputation before I sat down to watch it. I had seen it, but I remembered kind of liking it. But I had read the stories, I knew what it was about. I mean, we're talking about one of the most infamous box office bombs of the 80s. It was something that people either love ironically or just kind of pretend doesn't exist. But I try to go into every movie with an open mind. Maybe, just maybe, I'd find some hidden charm that others had missed, or maybe I'd come away understanding a little bit why George Lucas believed in this project so much that he helped bankroll it. No, that didn't happen. Instead, what I got was this baffling, tonally confused, and cringeworthy mess of a film. This is the kind of movie that makes you question how many people saw this script and thought, yup, this is it. This is the one. We got to make this. So let me break down and talk about why Howard the Duck, to me, is a cinematic oddity, but not necessarily an enjoyable one. First, the entertainment value. Now, I won't sugarcoat it. This movie was a chore to sit through. And I say that as someone who actively enjoys weird, offbeat cinema. If a movie is bizarre but leads into its insanity in a fun way, I'll roll with it. But Howard the Duck never quite gets there. I think it takes itself maybe too seriously, like they're trying to make a good movie. There are moments where it almost clicks into that so bad it's good category, like Howard's absurd feathered arrival on Earth, or the over-the-top dramatic Dark Overlord transformation scene. And if you're watching this with a group of friends who love riffing on bad movies, there's some potential for laughs, but as a solo viewing experience, it's rough. The comedy just doesn't land. There are a lot of weird slapstick moments, cheesy one-liners, and oddball humor that feel like they're meant for Looney Tunes cartoons, not a live-action movie featuring an anthropomorphic duck. And you've got the occasional raunchy jokes, like the infamous moment where we see the female duck in the bathtub, complete with duck boobs. I mean, don't even try to unpack that one. I also have to mention the forced romance between Howard and Betty. Look, I get it. This is all based on a comic book where Howard had a thing for human women, but seeing Leah Thompson flirt with a humanoid duck in live action, it's really unsettling. It's not charming. It's not funny. It's just really uncomfortable. And not in an intentional, thought-provoking way. Like The Shape of Water managed decades later, that kind of made sense, and it had that dramatic, and there was a feel about it. And here, it's just wrong. So when it comes to pure entertainment value, this movie isn't a total lost cause, but it's close. There are moments of unintentional comedy, and the practical effects of the Dark Overlord are actually kind of cool. But is it a movie I'd willingly rewatch? Not unless someone's giving me a 6-pack of beer or something, we're going to hang out and make fun of it. I mean, maybe that's a podcast episode in the future, but just to a quiet Saturday afternoon, nothing going on, this is never coming back on my TV. And then there's the storytelling, because this is what really stinks about this movie. It's got a complete and utter lack of any kind of coherent tone. From the very first scene, the movie doesn't seem to know who it's for. One minute it's throwing out goofy slapstick comedy, perfect for kids and families. The next it's tossing out weird innuendos like this is for some frat house party. And before you know it, we're watching a terrifying monster possess a man's body in a way that feels like it belongs in a Cronenberg film. So who's this movie for? Is it for kids? Adults? Sci-fi fans? Maybe just for people who lost a bet? I mean, the biggest issue is that it tries to be everything at once. A wacky comedy, a sci-fi adventure, a romance, a horror movie, and it fails at every single one of them. The plot is serviceable enough. I mean, Howard gets zapped from his home planet, lands in Cleveland, teams up with Beverly, gets caught in a ridiculous plot involving this interdimensional villain. But it moves at such a weird pace, with some scenes dragging on forever, while others rush through important details. And the characters don't help. Leah Thompson's Beverly is likable enough, and she's honestly probably the best thing about this movie. She gives it her all, even when she's delivering some truly terrible dialogue. Tim Robbins, on the other hand, is fully unhinged as Phil, the wannabe scientist. I mean, his performance is just so over the top, it feels like he's in a completely different movie. And then you have Jeffrey Jones. Dr. Jennings starts off as a normal scientist and slowly morphs into a possessed, electricity-shooting maniac. It's a performance that somehow he gets more ridiculous with every scene. And then there's Howard himself. The practical effects on his animatronic face are, I guess they're impressive for the time, but he never quite feels like a real character. His voice doesn't match his appearance, his dialogue is just grating, and he kind of just stumbles through the movie rather than actively driving the plot forward. Now look, I get that Howard the Duck was a weird comic to begin with, but the film adaptation I think completely misses what made the character work. The original Howard was a satirical, cynical, wisecracking duck thrown into a bizarre situations. But in this movie, he's just there, going through the motions without much personality. I mean, overall, the storytelling is just a mess. There are way too many tones clashing with each other, the pacing is completely uneven, and the character writing is just weak. It's a movie that desperately needed to pick a lane and stick with it. So my overall verdict, at the end of the day, Howard the Duck is kind of a fascinating in a how did this get made kind of movie. It's an example of what happens when a movie studio throws a ton of money at a project without really ever understanding what makes the source material work. So what's the final score? Well, I give Howard the Duck a 3 out of 10. Now, to be fair, it's not the worst movie I've ever seen. It's got some fun, campy elements, and I give it credit for its practical effects. But it's bogged down by a bad script, a confusing tone, and some really bizarre creative choices. If you love 80s oddities or you're a diehard bad movie fan, maybe check it out for the novelty. Otherwise, this one's probably left as a weird footnote in Marvel's history. But hey, at least it's not Morbius. Alright, well that's going to wrap up this episode of Real Talk. And if you made it this far, congrats, you survived Howard the Duck. I know I did, but just barely. Look, whether you love it, you hate it, or you just enjoy watching Hollywood's most baffling decisions unfold on screen, Howard the Duck is a fascinating piece of that 80s movie history. It's a reminder that sometimes, even with someone like George Lucas behind the scenes, a movie can go completely off the rails. But hey, isn't that part of the fun in revisiting old films? Now, if you enjoyed this episode, maybe it gave you a chuckle, or maybe it convinced you to finally give Howard the Duck a shot, or avoid it entirely, do me a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and share this episode with fellow movie lovers. Trust me, we need a support group for watching movies like this. Also, if you want more behind-the-scenes content, updates, or upcoming episodes, or just a place to chat about movies, follow me on social media. I'm on Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky at RealRealTalk. You can email me, therealrealtalk@gmail.com. I always love hearing your thoughts, whether you agree with me or you want to passionately defend Howard the Duck as a misunderstood masterpiece. And if that's the case, I genuinely want to hear your argument because I've got questions. But for next time, we're going to take a sharp turn from the bizarre to the brilliant. We're going from cigar-smoking alien ducks to tap-dancing Hollywood legends with Singin' in the Rain. This is one of the most beloved musicals of all time. And if you need a serious palate cleanser after the weirdness we just endured, trust me, you won't want to miss it. So get ready for some classic Hollywood magic, because next episode we're trading in dystopian Cleveland for Golden Age cinema. Until then, keep watching, keep loving, and keep those reels rolling. We'll talk to you soon.
Underneath the sun's green, 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 talking reels and all their schemes, dusty scenes and dreams unfold, stories told in shadows bold, gritty plots and whispers tight, dim for more.